Hello friends, Andrew Stevenson Jenkins III here, bringing you another Dota 2 video on behalf of Dota Alchemy, and in this video we're going to be looking at a few replays from different skill brackets and taking a look at the mid lane and just covering the difference in lane mechanics between the brackets. First and foremost, I want to shout out to the people who have submitted the replays for this. They are our Alchluminati tier of Patreon subscribers. So the people that have submitted replays are Adifix the Beardbarian, amazing name by the way, Jagger, Will, and then in brackets Redneck, Will Wix, Q, that's a different Will by the way, Jiao Yori, I'm never going to pronounce your name right, but this is the guy that has the golden voice in the last Alchemy Answers, US Danny, Jagger, Cave Bro, It's Greek Pete, RFX, and Prime Operator, who is my boy from Brazil. So this video was actually a suggestion from also a Patreon subscriber from the Philosopher's Stone tier. So Dayman, thank you so much for the suggestion. Really good idea. As always, you have brilliant ideas. But in any case, the first bracket that we're going to look at is a replay that was submitted by Jagger. This is 1.9k MMR. We're looking at Viper mid, I believe, versus Zeus. So here we are in the first replay. This was, of course, submitted once again by Jagger. He is 1.9k MMR, which I believe is Archon 1. And the first thing that I want to say before getting into the mistakes and the good things that I saw in this game and in this bracket is you guys submitted all winning replays for the most part. But that's okay. Next time, I will ask for losing replays, especially like losing replays where you feel like you should have won the game, because I think those are the best replays for learning from, because those are where you're going to make the mistakes that you don't know that you're making, because that's why you feel like you should have won. But in any case, just as a bit of a demonstration for the fact that I think that even winning replays contain good information, I'm going to use this one anyway. I'm going to use all of these replays, of course. And like I said, these are winning replays. I believe in this game, Jagger went 22-4, something like that with Viper. So this was a very, very good game, but even still, there are mistakes. There are good things, as is true in all brackets. So the first mistake is, of course, missing that block that we just saw. So your camera was put on the bot rune, and you were mid, waiting for the creep wave to spawn so you could block it, presumably, or just waiting for the game to start because you want to get to the mid lane, and you missed the block. That is obviously going to be a mistake, because if the creep wave is in the river, especially in this matchup, you are going to need to wait for the creep wave to get closer to your tower, maybe get some levels, until you get to the point where you can completely destroy and zone the Zeus. If the creep wave is on your hill at the start of the game, you can basically start dominating him earlier, and that's what you want. So missing that block is going to be bad, but with that being said, also sitting and waiting in front of the tower is pretty bad as well, because there's about 40 to 50 seconds where you can run to the enemy rune spot and you can maybe take an early fight before the runes actually spawn. You can still make it back to your tower to block the creep wave if you want to do that. A lot of people will just contest the rune and they say, fuck my block, it doesn't matter, I want to take a fight at the rune, and that is good too. But essentially the worst thing that you can do is just wait, because it's just 40 to 50 seconds where nothing is happening, where you could be doing something, and of course in Dota that is going to be something that could snowball into being very, very bad. So another thing that I want to mention is that in this game and in a lot of the 1 to 2K bracket games, camera positioning seems to be relatively static. Like, you will place it in just one location and leave it there, and it seems to be true even if the camera positioning is bad. So I would say that at the highest end of Dota, it's probably better to tell people, hey man, you can't move your camera as much. But at this rating, it seems like the camera movement is positioned in one location, not necessarily because it's good. Like, for example, there's a bunch of wasted space. You can't even see the creeps if any of them are in last hit range. You can't see if you're getting ganked or anything like that. But it doesn't seem like it is for the purpose of just having better information. And in the higher brackets, I would say, like, you want to have your camera positioned in one location, so that way you're not, like, giving yourself whiplash, moving the camera around and losing information because you're moving it so quickly. So it's basically the same problem, is that you're losing information by virtue of leaving it in a bad location. And the high-rated players lose information by virtue of constantly moving it around, so they're not actually able to take in any information. So one thing I do want to mention, another thing that I think is a little rough for you is and this is something in 1 to 2K bracket I would assume is a bit of a problem, and that's just, it seems like you understand your hero very well. It seems like you understand Viper. Presumably this is one of your best heroes, considering you did very well in this game with Viper. but it doesn't seem like you 100% understand Viper versus Zeus. Because you placed a ward in the lane against a Zeus, who if he just bolts you, especially if you're standing on the high ground, he's going to bolt you. He's going to get a free D ward on that, which is a bunch of gold, bunch of experience he doesn't need to get, and then you don't have that high ground vision specifically when it hits night, and you could get ganked. So it's very, very dangerous to place that ward, and you definitely need to understand the enemy hero that you're playing against just as well as the enemy as your hero if you want to win lanes. Another demonstration of this in this game is a lot of the time I noticed that you were zoning the Zeus, but not in situations where he has to come up and hit the creep wave. For example, a lot of the time you'd walk up and try to harass him when there isn't a creep in last hit range, so he really has no reason to come up and last hit the creep and get hit by you. So it's this thing where essentially you can play back when you know that Zeus has no reason to be up, but then when he has a reason to be up, you can go zone him. And you can kind of do this balancing act where he can't lane, but you're not putting yourself in too much danger. In this game, you didn't get ganked at all, but you could absolutely get ganked in other games. So, like I mentioned, there are good things about this game. I don't just keep ripping into you. These were just the list that I had. They started with a bunch of bad things, but I really like how aggressive you are in this lane. Like I said, it seems like you really understand your hero, Viper. You know that with these items, especially with how you've itemized with 2 Wraith Bands and a Wand, you understand that Zeus is going to give you infinite regen. You understand that the second Wraith Band is going to give you a lot of harass potential, last hit potential. So like basically you built to dominate this lane, and you do. You act very, very aggressively. So I really, really like that, the fact that you're trying to zone him. However, despite that being very, very good and your itemization being very, very good, I think that a lot of the time you, not exactly right now, but a lot of the time you're tanking creeps, you're right-clicking creeps when you don't necessarily want to push the lane into Zeus, because I think the way that you can play this is keep the creep wave on your hill, stand on his hill, try your hardest not to push the creep wave. That way he can't get into experience range, he can't get into last hit range. If he does, he dies, he takes damage, and you can basically completely choke him out of the lane that way. But when you push the creep wave into him, you are giving him experience and farm that he doesn't need to be getting in this lane. Basically, those are the things that I noticed in this game, and things that were common between this replay and some of the other replays that I've seen in 1 to 2K. Probably a bunch of other things that I missed, good and bad, but of course that is replay analysis. Here's where you kill him, which is very, very good. I like that you know that as soon as you get 6, you're very, very strong. You go for a kill on him. That's definitely good, especially because you've seen the supports in the other lanes. But without that high ground ward, it is very dangerous here. So here we have the second replay submitted by Yori. 3.6k MMR. Most of the replays submitted were between 3 to 4k, maybe a little bit below 3k, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think our average viewer probably 2.5 to 3.5k. That's like the average Dota players around that rank. On Pugna, that was the average viewer, so I'm assuming it's about the same. But in any case, I think a lot of the things from this bracket will be apparent in a lot of your games if you are from the average viewership MMR, possibly. But in any case, I like the fact that you use the courier in the mid lane. I don't believe we saw that in the previous replay. I think as a mid laner, you have full access to the courier. It is the closest lane that you can send the courier to where it's not going to be taking a lot of time. It's a 1v1 lane. It's very, very important that you dominate this lane as much as you can. I'm going to open up the CS here just so we can see. Once again, this was a game where I believe Yori completely destroyed. So there is a lot of good stuff in this game, and of course, no matter what, there's always going to be bad stuff, even at 6k. So once again, I like the fact that you use the courier. I don't believe we saw that in the previous replay. Absolutely do whatever it takes to win mid. And with that being said, one criticism that I do have is that in this game, you never send out a second null talisman. You are dominating this lane. When you submitted it on Discord, you said that you knew that you were like a counter matchup, and that you do very, very well in this lane. Presumably, Visage is one of your better heroes if you know that. And yet, not sending out a second null talisman is basically allowing Tinker to get a little bit out of this lane that he shouldn't. You can completely crush with a second null talisman. You can totally afford a second null talisman. And I think the Wand, while it's going to be a pretty effective item, and I've definitely seen more and more people going for Wand now that null tallies are getting nerfed, it's not super effective against a Tinker. I think in this lane, you know that you can crush. You probably just want to go as absolutely balls to the wall in investing in just crushing this Tinker. Like, basically go for max in your queue, go for a second null talisman, just keep whacking him, because you know he got such low armor. He's such a slow-moving little fella, and you can just completely crush him really, really early on. With that being said, you did very well in this lane, despite that, but you can still always do more. So I like your laning mechanics. I've noticed that more so than in like the previous replay, for example, and a lot of the 1 to 2K replays, you are pulling creeps a lot. You're trying to keep the equilibrium in a place where it's really good for you, which is very, very good. For instance, in terms of controlling creeps, I noticed that you're playing the high ground really well. Like, there's a point in this replay, I don't think it's happened yet, but there's a point in this replay where you run up to the high ground, you get a last hit on the range creep, which of course is displaying an understanding of like, you don't want to miss that range creep by virtue of just having that mischance on the uphill, and you know the Tinker is a weaker hero than you, so you go for it. You go for the last hit, and then that actually ends up zoning him, and then you deny his range creep. So that was like absolutely beautiful. There's a lot of times in this game where your lane mechanics just looked really, really stellar. As you can see, there's no just like last hitting there's no like hitting the creeps and pushing them into the enemy team. There's none of that. You're doing a really good job at static in the lane, which is exactly what I would expect at this bracket, especially if you understand the hero very well in the matchup. I would say that you do take a little bit of unnecessary creep damage. Once again, it goes back to that comment that I made in the previous replay. It seems like you, instead of having like camera movement that's getting stuck in locations, your camera movement is good and you're moving around a lot with the camera. With that being said, it seems like you kind of like lose control of your hero a little bit, which I totally understand. I think 3 to 4K rating, that would probably make sense. There is a shitload to Dota. And especially if you're like focusing super heavily on last hitting, it is definitely hard to like keep track of all of the things that are going on, plus like your hero's positioning. So maybe like a little bit of focus on that, and you're going to get a lot more out of this lane, because you can see that your HP, you're very, very low. You sent out tangos, which is good. I think you could have sent out a salve with the mangoes. That's also something. Just with how much. I think you probably would have been fine if you didn't tank a lot of the creep damage, but given that you've tanked a lot of the creep damage, I think you should feel totally okay with sending out the courier a little bit more just to get like a salve, because there is a period there where like if that pudge hits you with the hook, you die. And he's getting a lot out of this lane where I think he could get a lot less if you were full HP right now. The problem is that you're sitting at this HP threshold where you're unsafe, and you could totally use the courier earlier so that you have a salve. And I think I don't know who it was that said it, but it was a quote or something. It was like S4 or something. He said every time you send out a salve, you should probably just send out a second one, and that is just essentially so you have an extra salve when you need it, and not send it out at the time that you need it. So you'll already have it basically. So basically, like if you're rolling and regen in the mid lane, if you have like a salve in your inventory or a tango in your inventory, or even a clarity in your inventory, it doesn't matter. You have the backpack slots. Absolutely feel free to send out those salves, so that way this Tinker, instead of being level 5, he will be level 4. So another thing is that actually this happened earlier. You may have noticed it in the replay, and maybe you're like, "What, Jenkins? Why didn't you say anything?" But there was a point where you saw Tinker ward. He had a ward in his inventory. He placed it in your vision. Your camera was on him, but because you haven't really been clicking the Tinker as much as you probably should, he gets a ward down, and it's on you, and it scouts you for the entirety of the laning phase. And you could have sent out a sentry and used the tango to instantly get that ward. The sentry pays for itself in the ward. You get experience, and you get extra gold from taking that ward as well. And then you prevent the Tinker, who probably at this point shouldn't even be able to lane here. You prevent him from coming to the lane. Like, he can't lane if there's no vision, because he thinks he's just going to get ganked. So basically, I would say that your lane mechanics are very good. I would say that your last hitting and denying is probably at the same level as like a 5 to 6K player. It seems like all of your like pulling mechanics, staying on the high ground, all of that stuff is very good. But with that being said, there are overarching issues with like your hero positioning a little bit, sending out enough regen, setting out the right items to dominate the lane, and clicking on the enemy hero. And this is honestly what I would expect for problems at a 3 to 4K level, just because they are kind of more high-level problems than just very basic understanding of the game problems. It's very hard to get your hero positioning right, especially if your camera movement is already good. It's very hard to click on the enemy heroes a lot, as well as doing all of these other things in Dota. But with that being said, one thing at a time, you just practice, and eventually it will all become super, super easy and super impulsive and instinctual for you. So here we have the final replay, mid lane, of course. Slark versus TA. We have Ush on Slark versus Azriel on TA. And you may know either of these two players. Azriel is a guy or girl that everybody jokes about being a bot, because nobody has ever heard his or her voice on mic. They never speak, they never talk, they never type. They literally just pick TA every single game, first pick. Look it up, like 1,000 TA games. Just play TA. It's absolutely insane. So Azriel is the open AI of US East, And then we have Ush, who has played competitive before. Very, very good player, been in top 100 multiple times, and he's playing Slark versus the TA. So we can see that first and foremost, he's not fighting the rune. And I know I said in the previous replay that it's really good to fight the rune. For the most part, it is. But he knows, presumably, that Pudge and Darkseer is probably going to get the rune because it's a very, very strong lane. So he doesn't necessarily need to go and fight. With that being said, also, he's against a TA, so we could see where he was standing when he blocked. That's like the Arteezy block, where you stand right to the right of the tower, which will allow him to send the range creep first. And as a melee hero versus TA, as a hero who probably shouldn't do that well against a TA, he wants to have the creep wave pushing into him. And as we talked about in the previous two clips, if the creep wave is pushing into you, you're going to get a lot more than you probably should in the lane. We can see Ush actually made a mistake there, and he placed the ward on the high ground in vision, which Azrael could deward, but I don't know if that's in his code to deward that. So I guess we'll see. In terms of lane mechanics, we can see that both Azrael and Ush have pretty good lane mechanics. Azrael is playing right outside the tower range. When the creeps die, he's making sure to not be the closest thing to the tower, because then that would hit him, and he's making sure he doesn't have an attack command issued on Ush when the creeps die, and yet he is playing in the tower and contesting Ush on the creep wave. Ush, likewise, is trying to contest Azrael as much as he can, so both of these players just really understanding not to get hit by the tower, not to pull too many creeps, but to essentially trade harass as much as they can, regardless. And you can see that Ush pulls the creeps such that there's a group around his range creep, and then there's a group around their range creep, goes for the range creep last hit, doesn't send the courier up into the mid lane, because if he did, it could get side-bladed and it could die. But in any case, it's very important that he did that pull there, because, once again, it's this melee hero versus TA. If he's just sitting passively on the creep wave and allowing the TA to just play the lane and not splitting the creep wave into two waves like that, he's just going to get side-bladed down and get completely, utterly destroyed. So, really good lane mechanics from Ush. We can see that he's sending out a Wraith Band, presumably. I think regardless of if you want to destroy with a Wraith Band or you want to not get destroyed with somebody who has a Wraith Band, you basically have to send it out, because otherwise you will just straight up lack damage in a meta where people are getting Wraith Bands, Bracers, and Null Talisman. So it's like in any case, you kind of have to go for it, and he does. So Azrael goes and gets a rune. This is really important. This isn't exactly Ush doing this. I kind of wanted to focus on Ush in this, but because Ush won this lane pretty well. But Azrael goes and gets a rune, so he's just paying attention to the runes spawning, and maybe he pushed the creep wave out to get the rune, but maybe he didn't. Doesn't really matter. What's most important is just that he's focusing on, like, if a haste rune spawns, if an invis rune spawns, if an illusion rune spawns, you want to go get runes potentially. It depends. At the very least, you want to look at the runes and see if, like, they're good, because if you control the runes, you can essentially do what Azrael is doing right now, where you can take a lane that he was losing and he's just getting free denies, free last hits, because Ush cannot contest him. And as a result of Azrael having this DD, Ush preemptively sends out the salve. And this goes back to what I said in the previous clip, where even if you don't need a salve, you will eventually probably need a salve. So just preemptively sending it is very, very important, as I actually show up to the lane and get very, very lucky hooking Azrael. This guy's very good at TA, so I was just like, all right, I gotta gank this guy. We have a Slark mid. He's probably not going to do too well. I didn't know Ush was doing this well, but in any case, I felt like I needed to gank him, but it doesn't matter. So Ush sends out a bunch of regen now. He sends out a Mango too, even though he doesn't even necessarily need a Mango. He just knows that in the future he might need one, and this way he can walk up to the creep wave, go for that last hit. TA does a lot of damage to him, but guess what? He already has the healing salve sending out on the courier. And that's really, really important, because that means he doesn't have to go back to base. All he has to do is walk back to the courier and go for it. He's actually going for a third Wraith Band, I think, because he wants to be more active on Slark. So one final thing that I want to say before just doing an outro, before we get finished with this video, I want to mention that you may have noticed that Ush's camera movement is quite good. He is basically positioning the camera centered around his hero. And the reason that's good in the mid lane, to keep your camera, like, constantly moving around your hero and around where the creep equilibrium is because you can get ganked from any angle in mid lane. If you're a side laner, it's probably dog shit, actually, for you to have your camera like that. As we can see, Azrael picks up another rune and is going to use that to just abuse Ush. But in any case, you want to have your camera around your hero in the mid lane, because there are so many angles you can get ganked. There are so many angles you can see somebody placing the ward. There's a lot of things that could happen from all angles. If you're on the side lane, you want to have your hero at the bottom of your camera, at the top of your camera, depending on where your base is. You just want to have access in terms of information to the locations where enemy heroes could be coming from. And then we hit the 5-minute mark. Ush doesn't want to contest this lane with the Bane there. TA is getting a little bit stronger, and he goes for the bounties to fight those, and potentially goes Enshrined. But in any case, that's really it for this video. I think basically what we've seen so far from this replay, at the very least, is just a little bit of improvement on the things that we criticized in the previous clips. That's basically it. The lane control is good. The last inning, of course, is good because it was in 3 to 4K bracket as well. A lot of good stuff. Really, the big mistake in this replay that I would say is placing that ward. Other than that, this was a very well played lane. That's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I also appreciate the Patreon boys for submitting the replays, and thanks to Dayman for the idea on making this video. Let me know if you guys think this is a cool idea for, making more content like this, or if there's any improvements you think I could make. Once again, it's kind of a new format. A lot of the other videos on the channel, we have like a list of things, like how we do that format of video. So this is something that's totally new, so forgive me if it's a little choppy. We will get better in the future if you want more of this stuff. But in any case, I didn't want to show a 7K, like, some Sumail playing mid or something like that, just because I feel like that could be its own video. This is already long enough, and I'm making it longer by doing this outro. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys in another video.